Today on Energy Contact, we're mostly holes and empty space with no real substance to speak of. But something has to organize all of that nothing into something that isn't random, that doesn't just fall apart, that doesn't just go into a pile or a blob. Well, today we're going to look at what your chakras and aura have to do with bringing order to all that random. So keep it together for the next half hour and focus, because that's what we're ordering up right now on Energy Contact.
I'm gonna drive away all these doubts I've been keeping and out. Keep my mind on better things. I ain't gonna worry and I ain't gonna complain. I'm gonna drive away all these doubts I've been keeping and out. Keep my mind on better things. Just keep my mind on better things.
Hello, and welcome to Energy Contact. My name is Joseph Willenbrink. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you to the staff in the studio here for helping me get my message out to you. Energy Contact is a series that I'm presenting to you as a public service. It's about attaining perfect health, growth, self-improvement, happiness, and realizing your full potential. It's designed to present you a new way of looking at yourself, and a new way of looking at the world around you. We're talking about things that have to do with making an energetic contact with yourself internally and with your environment. There's no difference between the body, the mind, the spirit, the emotion, the intellect, the ego. There's no difference between mass and energy. These things are all exactly the same. There is something about us that loves to separate, parse these things out, categorize, classify, put each one in their own little compartment. But in fact, all that health and growth and self-improvement we're talking about take place when we do just the opposite. It happens when we put these things together, when we make an energetic contact between the physical world and the unseen one. We're presenting on these programs a brand new paradigm that's thousands of years old. We're presenting extraordinary topics for ordinary people. And let's move right ahead with that. Let's bring up a slide. Everyone please understand that I am not a doctor. I don't want to be a doctor. This show is not a medical show, medical help show, medical advice show. It's not a medical nothing show. Couldn't be further from it. Now, I might call myself an energy healer or a chakra healer, things like that. So might you if you came to me. But state, federal, and local governments call me no such thing at all. And it's important to understand that. There's a lot of important information on your screen right now. Please read all of that, if you will, with your full attention, with your full awareness. But when you've got that down, now would be a great time to locate a pencil and paper. And here's why you want to do that. At the end of this program, when we roll some credits, there's going to be contact information for me. Now, I invite and encourage you to contact me. I'm sort of hoping that something that I have to tell you today will inspire you to want to do that. But in order to contact me, you're going to need that contact information. And in order to get that, you're going to need a pencil and paper. There'll be plenty of time to jot that stuff down if you got your pencil and paper ready. All right, let's come back up here. Today's program is show number 71. And if you're tuning in for the first time today, well, thanks and welcome. I'm glad you're here. You'll enjoy the show today. Now, these shows are sequential. They build. We're talking about things today that we've introduced and explained, defined, stuff like that on previous shows. So there's some ramp-up stuff, some up-to-speed things that you will have missed out on. However, I'm doing my very best to make sure that every show has a lot of value on a standalone basis. So please stick around. You'll get something out of it. And if what you see piques your interest, and it is one of your first times joining me, well, please look around, because there will be earlier programs airing at later times. They'll either be re-airing right here on this station, or they'll be on at different days and times in different areas. And if you look for them, I'll appreciate it. All right, and now is the part of the program where we get to introduce my co-host to you. Let's get my buddy Slim on camera. Here's my pal Slim. And Slim is here for a reason. Since we're investigating what energy contacts in the physical self, we have to know a few things about a few things, don't we? we have to know something about energy. And this show is certainly all about energy. That's what we're talking about. But all that energy out there somewhere in some abstract place does us no good. It does us no good at all until we bring it into focus, until we bring it into contact with something. My buddy Slim here is here to help us understand that thing that the energy contacts. Remember, a body without energy is just a corpse. And energy without a body, well, it might be a number of cool things, but none of them are human. All right, previously on Energy Contact, we have been looking at your chakras and aura. And we've been looking at all sorts of invisible things, and we have seen that what is visible and what is invisible have absolutely nothing to do with what is real and what is unreal. If anything, the physical part is the unreal part. It's a hologram of sorts, an optical illusion. It's a projection. It's like a bunch of balloons without the plastic. Matter doesn't matter. It's that energetic world of wavelengths and frequencies and flows and vibrations. That's all that's real. That's all that's important. This physical form then is a creation of thought. It's a projection of that. And thought is a wave. It's an energy field. And so is your aura. The tools that it uses to generate this form are the internal forces that animate us. Breath, frequency, pulse, rhythm, vibration. And the external forces that push and pull us around. Gravity, energy, entropy, the bumps and bruises, the kisses and hugs of life. All those external forces iterating and interreacting and interrelating with the internal forces. Now, energetically, it's important to keep in mind that there's really no difference between anything and anything. It's all one thing. Like ice and water and steam, they look different, but they're all the same thing. Yet we live in a physical world of perceived difference. And even though we know it's a false perception, everything here seems to be sort of binary. It sort of separates out into one or the other, either or. Now, those external forces, we've seen that they include all sorts of invisible things. Electricity, radio waves, wireless internet signals, cell phone signals. The list goes on and on. And there are things like chakras and nadis and auras that are sort of on the internal forces team, if you will. And the frequencies of all those things lie somewhere upon what science calls the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, our investigation of the electromagnetic spectrum has revealed to us that there's a whole lot going on that our eyes, that our senses are not perceiving. One thing that we have seen for sure that's real on Energy Contact, though, is that body intellect. We've spoken of that body intellect. We've seen how all those things that we were always told were brain things, thought, memory, reason, recall, intellect, intelligence, all those things, they're not brain things. They're in every cell of us. They're in every thread of every fiber of our being. They permeate us. They saturate us. Your body, then, is just a physical projection of that far more invisible and far more real body intellect. So all of these forces, the presence of all these forces, they have to work in balance with each other. Their balance holds the key to life and death, sickness and health, attraction and repulsion, order and chaos, all sorts of other pairs of things. And knowing that, we have come to accurately see ourselves, not as physical creatures that happen to contain some energy, like a glass contains water, but more like energy beings that just happen to have a physical shell. And that brings us to today. Today, we want to learn more about these internal and external forces. Even though we introduced them, I think, on episode number 2 of Energy Contact, we're still learning more about them. We want to see today what they are doing in us and what they're doing out of us and how they interact, how your energetic self builds you in relation to your environment. We want to see where your chakras and aura fit into all this picture and why it matters, why we should care. Specifically, we want to see what gives order, shape, form, substance, what gives a physical presence to these seemingly random, what would otherwise be seemingly random energetic motions. Now, physicists, since the dawn of time, have spent their life studying, investigating, hypothesizing about the nature of these internal and external physical forces. And that's what we're doing too, in a more mystical context. But this understanding is not the goal. The goal is to get to what all this aura chakra business, all this internal and external force business has to do with your health, growth, self-improvement, happiness, and realizing your full potential, your true self. So we're studying physics. And while it's not our purpose to give you a PhD, we do want to clear up the false perception that all this aura chakra business was all dreamed up by hippies high on pot. In fact, it's not. It's hard science. It's very basic. It's as scientific and real as E equals MC squared. So, we're understanding esoteric things analytically, looking at mysticism through scientific eyes. And while this analysis is worthwhile, it means to some extent we're classifying and categorizing, and that is very dangerous territory here on Energy Contact. As we go through these things, please keep in mind that too much analysis will take you away from your goal rather than towards it. All right, so that's where we're headed today. But first, we've reached the part of the show where we get to take our virtual field trip, our journey in our mind's eye. So sit back, take a deep breath, close your eyes if you're in a place to do that. Because today, you're going to visualize that we find ourselves at some sort of science and technology museum of some sort. We're looking into a room in this place, and we're looking at a room that is filled with a bunch of objects, just sort of floating in the air. They're just suspended there. There's a big globe in the middle, and then a bunch of little magnets sort of orbiting, floating around it. But there's nothing visible in the space between them, nothing visibly holding them there. Now, our museum guide tells us that what's holding them there is a delicate balance of attractions and repulsions, that these things have to attract each other enough to sort of stay suspended there, but they have to repel each other enough so that they don't bump into each other, so that they don't collide. And then our host invites you to enter the room. And you go through a couple of doors because it's a sealed area, and finally you get in there. And the moment you enter, you notice that the magnets all sort of float a little differently, and they adjust themselves into different positions. You also notice that your hair's standing on end a little bit. Our guide tells you, now through a speaker system into the room, that your entrance there has readjusted the equilibrium of the room, that you are no longer a detached observer from the outside. You're on the inside now. You're both the observer and the thing being observed. You're a part of the system. You have an effect on the magnetic fields, and the magnetic fields have an effect on you. And so you move around the room slowly and carefully, and as you do, you notice that these magnets all just sort of float around, sort of like floats on wavy water. And about that time, it occurs to you that these magnets are not much different than the planets, the way they work in the solar system, or than electrons floating around atoms. And that makes you pause for a moment to reflect upon what actions and inactions and things are going on in all the atoms inside you. Then just for fun, you decide to reach out and grab one of the magnets and sort of pull it towards you. But as you do, you immediately have to duck because that movement causes all those other magnets to move very quickly, to readjust once again. All right, hold that thought. Okay, way back on Energy Contact, we introduced the internal and external forces, and we saw what they had to do with your physiology, with your physical anatomy. Now we're investigating chakras and auras, and we find ourselves right back there again. Why? Because they're all the same. There's no difference. Now, in reality, there is only one thing. But as we've mentioned, the physical world is binary. Things tend to sort of separate into twos. So we're looking at two sets of energy fields that affect you. The waves that we shine out into our environment and the waves that the environment shine into us. There are forces working from within us and forces on the outside of us. Now, the outside things are pressuring us. They're pushing us in, but it's okay. They're supposed to do that. And we push back. But let's change gears for a moment and look at some of those empty things floating around in empty space. Let's bring up a slide. And we're going to see an atom and a solar system. One's on one side of your screen and one's on the other. They look about the same, don't they? Except that neither one is to scale. One is infinitesimally small, and the other is infinitely huge. You see those orbit lines? Those don't exist on either side. They're just there to kind of illustrate the paths that the planets or the electrons travel on. But those things are floating on empty space. The electrons or the planets, they're all in order. Somehow, some way, the electrons know how not to spiral into the nucleus, but they also know how not to float away from it either. Somehow, on the other side, Jupiter knows how not to collapse into Mars, and it knows how not to spin out and bump into Saturn. All right, let's come back here. At first glance, all of these floatings, they seem so random, but whatever it is that gives them their order is very real, because they stay ordered for a long time, don't they? They're very real and invisible. But to us, it just seems like they all sort of magically know their place somehow. In that solar system example, what holds Jupiter in place is partly a function of what's going on inside Jupiter, and partly a function of what the rest of the solar system is doing to Jupiter. In other words, internal forces and external forces are both required to give order to the random. But either way you look at it, it's something invisible. Just like the solar system, 99.9999999% of an atom is empty space. It's void. It's nothing. It's not air. It's not ether. It's nothing. And since the physical you is 100% atoms, what that means is that 99.99999% of you is nothing. At least the physical you. There's nothing going on. It's all unreal. The matter doesn't matter. But wait a minute. There's something in there that makes you alive. So, there's something real in there somewhere. We'll look at that. But what we are is in fact a bunch of nothing floating around other nothings in invisible fields of something. We consist of internal forces, breath, rhythm, vibration, frequency, and pulse. But nadas and auras and kundalini and chakra, all those things we've been discussing the past few episodes, they're all in there too. And all of that is acted on by a set of external forces. We've seen gravity and energy and entropy. We've been talking about them since day one. But just recently, we've seen that energy component sort of busts out, if you will, and it's largely composed of all the energy waves in something called the electromagnetic spectrum. Let's take a look at that. What you see here is a picture of a bunch of external energy that affects us. Now, you can see that there's a lot going on in the universe that our eyes, that our physical perception does not see. We're not taking it in. How can you see that? Well, on that whole bar on the top of your screen there, that is the whole set of energy waves in the world. But all we can see as human beings is that tiny little part in the middle, just that tiny little part inside that red circle. The entire visible spectrum, that's that middle portion, is ostensibly made up of the 7 colors of the rainbow. And they're all in that tiny little section there. You can see them: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. But if you look down below that, you can see that those colors aren't real. There is only the pure white light. Color is just a perception. It's reality bent through that prism there. And when it bends, it fragments into the appearance of the colors of the rainbow. All right, let's come back here. We live in these fields. We're bathed in them. We're floating around like the magnets in that field trip example that we saw. We're swimming around like fish in a big energetic fish bowl. And there's no real boundary between where our environment ends and where we begin. It's arbitrary at best. Or in other words, there's no real distinction between the internal forces and the external forces. So, let's look at them both. The external forces, gravity, energy, entropy, they react and change the internal forces. But for the most part, the external forces don't change. That's not really true, but for now, we're going to think of them as constant. And that leads us to put ourselves in a position where we cooperate with what we can. And some of those guys we've seen are bad energy waves. They're destructive waves. And so we don't want to pick fights with the things that we cannot cooperate with. Gravity always wins. Nature always wins. We can fight it if we want. It's our choice. And many people do. But if you fight, you will lose. Energy is immortal. And so if you cooperate with it, you win too. But to cooperate, you need to utilize your internal forces. Now we say on Energy Contact that gravity falls down, energy falls up, and entropy falls apart. Now when we were talking about physical anatomy, those things were very abstract. But as we get into the energetic side of things, you'll start to see that that makes a lot more sense. It's important as we talk about these things to keep in mind that unless you are doing something right now, something with that energy component, you are falling down and falling apart right now. Let's take a moment to understand entropy, because that's a word we don't use every day. Entropy is important to us because it is the source of the random. It's that thing that we have to counteract, counterbalance, deal with if we want order, form, shape, health, arrangement, things like that. The law of entropy has been explained a number of ways and a lot of technical ways. That's why nobody seems to understand it. But here's really all you need to know about entropy. We can take a drinking glass out on the sidewalk and throw it down, and we will get thousands of pieces every time without fail. But try as we may, we cannot take 1,000 pieces and throw them down and get a drinking glass. Things fall apart all by themselves. We can put things together, but that takes work. We got to do something. Things fall apart all by themselves. So if you are doing nothing right now, you are falling apart right now. An army of doctors and a cabinet full of prescription medicines will not absolve you from your solemn responsibility to keep yourself together. It's your job. And if you want to keep yourself together, you got to do something. Maybe not a whole lot really, but you got to do something. The law of entropy states that the randomness of you, of atoms, of the solar system, of everything else in the universe, the randomness is increasing. So we want to understand then what's holding anything together if that's the case. What's counterbalancing that? What is it that's creating the order out of the chaos? And that brings us to internal forces, which brings us immediately to your chakras. We have hundreds of chakras spinning around. They're spinning around like the magnets we saw, attracting and repelling each other, or like the electrons on the atom. They're pulling each other together enough to keep from flying away, and they're pushing each other apart enough not to bump into each other. In the universe where there's a blurred distinction between the water in the fish bowl and the water in the fish, the chakras are both the cause and the effect of interactions. The energy that flows through them, and therefore through you, is the invisible thing that makes you alive. That is precisely what makes you something different than that anatomically correct corpse. And when it leaves you, you're dead. Let's take a look at those chakras. Let's bring up our next slide. Here are your 7 main chakras. That fellow on the left with the springs is a schematic model. You'll notice that the middle 5 chakras have a front and a back, and they point out horizontally, parallel to the earth. And the top and the bottom ones are vertical. They're perpendicular to the earth, and they do not have a front and a back. In a way, they're the front and the back of each other. Now notice the colors. The 7 main chakras each have their own color, and they're the same rainbow colors that you just saw in the electromagnetic spectrum, going from the bottom up, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And each of these things have their own geometric space, or shape. They're all ordered. There is nothing random about them. They are all ordered, they are not random, and they are not accidental. So let's see what this has to do with our aura. Let's go right to the next slide. And you will see that we really don't have an aura. We have a series of bodies. We have one physical body and another 6 or so that are more subtle. That is, more etheric, less thick, less gross. They're invisible, but they're at least as real. In fact, they're more so. Now, as it happens, you can see from that middle thing in your screen there, each of the 7 main chakras correspond to one and only one of these bodies. There's a one-to-one correspondence between them. Now we can think of the chakras as the skeletons, the bones of the aura. And we can see here that the subtle bodies yield a series of layers, like an onion. But what this picture cannot show you is that they sort of flux and shimmer like the wavy lines down the road on a hot day. And, oh, by the way, keep in mind through all this that there's really no difference between your physical body and your subtle bodies. All right, let's come back up here. So all these chakras, they're in constant motion, they're spinning, and that generates fields. For now, this is not really true either, as we'll see soon, but for now, you can visualize that the more they spin, the healthier you are. Now that spinning starts a chain reaction. That spinning starts wave and pulse and motion, starts those internal forces into play, and that creates a sympathetic harmony with those subtle bodies, with the aura, and that creates that nice energy shimmering effect, like the wavy lines in the distance on a hot day, which can generate a nice subtle color as the vibrations move just outside of what for most people is the visible range of the electromagnetic spectrum. But some people have a slightly expanded visual range of the electromagnetic spectrum, and those people can see them. The chakras, as we've seen, are both the subject and the object of our interactions with the environment. We cannot consider one set of forces without the other. There's no difference, but they behave differently. So, we get into the effect. When an external wave goes through us, there's the people who live next to power plants and places where destructive waves are. When it goes through us in a dissonant manner, dissonant things happen. It results in mutated cells and chaos and unhappiness and randomness. When an external wave goes through us in a harmonious manner, good things happen. And that yields health and growth and happiness and self-improvement and all of those things. But these internal waves, the second they shine out into the external universe, then they become external waves. So, there's not much difference between the water in the fish and the water in the fish bowl. So, you are an ecosystem. And we're seeing that what it is that gives order to all of this stuff, the answer to that question, it's the empty space. The internal forces are the things that are doing the work to create order in a chaotic universe. But it's the empty space between, it's the balance that keeps all these things going. For you, what that means is that you want to look at the internal forces. You want to look inside, literally and figuratively. And how well you do that, or how poorly you do that, is one of the things that determines to what degree you are healthy, or to what degree you are sick. It's the empty space that provides the order and the arrangement. Because we have seen that these energy waves, they float through mass. They float through mass just like it's nothing. They float through any mass, your mass, whoever. And it's all the same. Like ice and water and steam, there's no real difference between the energy wave and the wave that you call you. And that's what we're going to look at more in the future. But for now, we're out of time. I'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me. Until then, I wish you peace and positive energy and a healthy life in Energy Contact.